Hello, welcome to the Honest Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob. Today, I'm going to be talking about the Battescroll update from Games Workshop. Battescroll update is a... Hello, welcome to the Honest Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob. Today, I'm going to be reviewing the Battescroll update from Age... Oh, no! Hello, welcome to the Honest Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob. I'm joined by the Twitch chat, and today... I'm going to be talking about the Battescroll update from Games Workshop for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. We've smashed this. That's perfect. Perfect intro. So if you are watching this, I'm going to be going through the updates and what they might mean for the game as a whole. They happen every 3 months, or they kind of happen every 6 months, but they kind of work either in conjunction with the GHB or in the interim between them, and that's a 6-month period. So this is the update. Okay, we'll be talking about the couple of rule changes that they've done, and we'll be talking about whether or not we think that's successful or not successful. Again, and this is always something to say that's super important, if you're just a very, very casual, chilled gamer who plays one game every 6 months, this almost has no effect. It doesn't ruin your army, it doesn't ruin anything, don't worry. And the changes that they do sometimes, the changes that they sometimes make will have a massive effect, but only on a very top-end wedge of skill expression, which sometimes isn't going to mean that much, but it's going to make you feel things, and hopefully I can make you feel things. So that's what we're going to do together. As always, I'm supported by everyone on the Honest Wargamer Patreon. Let's dive straight into the information. Thanks to the Twitch chat, you're all wonderful. Let's go. So the first thing to talk about is the meta. If you are new to Age of Sigmar or new to gaming generally, what happens is lots of people play at tournaments, and because there are 26 plus armies, what happens is you develop this amazing rock, paper, scissors like mechanic called the meta. And this is where some armies are represented a lot, like Slaves to Darkness being the most popular army you'll play against, and some armies are almost never represented. This also means that when you have something like Slaves to Darkness, which have high armor saves and are good in melee, you get what's called a combat meta. The conversations about what a meta currently looks like is always up for interpretation and prediction. This is why people who write great lists are very, very smart, and they get to make these really cool plays and they wow people, or people take what we call off-meta lists, which are lists that either don't perform well or aren't very popular, and then they do something pretty crazy with it. As well as armies, also units fall into being on-meta, as in popular and used a lot, and off-meta. A good example of on-meta would be Lumineth Realm Lord Sentinels, a unit that would be off-meta. Oh wow, what is even off-meta nowadays? I guess a Merc Knob with a Belcher banner from Cruelboyz, I guess? Something like that. Generally. So, Kragnos is definitely on meta, I think. So that's what a meta looks like, and that's what a meta means. Yeah. On the Age of Sigmar stats, which are not the same as Games Workshop stats. Games Workshop stats are not done quite as well. They're scraped from like league games and one-day tournaments, so they're not as effective as people like us because, well, we just try harder. And so our stats are here, and you can find them on thehonestwargamer.com. So what does that generally look like? In our stats, for this GHB exclusively, although you can really bore down, for instance, if we want to, which we do want to, we're going to exclude mirror matches so you get a kind of slightly nicer look at how the game looks. There's only 2 armies which are an issue. That would be Big Woaahh and Lumineth Realm Lords. Lumineth Realm Lords at 56%. Games Workshop don't necessarily hit that. They actually put Disciples of Tzeentch at a 60% win rate, and Gloomspite Gitz at a 57% win rate. Now, that's not actually wholly accurate, because, as you can see, they're not here. It's 52 for Gloomspite Gitz, but if you do want to get really gnarly, and one of the things that's really interesting about stats, if you really want to get into it, is there's positive win rate potentials, battalion usage, and everything else. If we were to look at Gloomspite Gitz, they are fairly problematic if played in Jaws of Mork. Okay, so they have a 62% win rate. So Games Workshop's version of the stats don't let you have a look at how powerful an army is if you're only playing a certain sub-faction. For instance, if you're playing with Trogs, not only are you a powerfully beautiful human being, yeah, you are also only got a 49% win rate. So you're kind, sweet, funny, interesting, and bam, 49% win rate. So you're perfectly balanced in all ways, including your love of Trogs, which is perfect. So Jaws of Mork are more of an issue than Trogs are. Okay, so that gives you a little bit more ability to bore down on this information. So worth looking at when you want to look in, when you're talking about the Battescroll, when you're talking about the meta and everything else. it's worth talking about. So Lumineth Realm Lords are a real problem in the game. Not a huge problem, not anywhere near as much of a problem as the game has been before. They're at a 56% win rate. That's a percent over what we consider to be acceptable. But they are very, very, very good. There's also another system look at this, which is ratio based, but we can do that in a whole nother video. Doesn't really matter, but that's effectively what a meta is. And then anything underneath 45% we consider to need a bit of a help. So Seraphon need a bit of a help, but we do have a new book in the summer. Ironjaws at 43% and Soulblight Gravelords. And they've got a new book which we'll be reviewing very soon. So that's roughly where everything else is. So anything else maybe needs some buffs if you want it to, but it's sat in a very nice place. This is actually the healthiest the meta has ever been. It's in a really solid place. Okay, and that brings us in to a look at the changes that they've made to change this meta and what they are going to do. Anyone in the game can do, apart from OCRs until the new book. And what this does is it allows you to return any slain models on a 6+. Now, many of the new army books and many of the new strong abilities allows you to rally on a 4+. And that's something that we've seen as a bit of a problem, especially if you talk about things like Gloomspite Gitz, although it's actually really been a massive problem in the Fyreslayer's book, where you've had 2 Flamekeepers and you've used slain models to buff up the Flamekeeper's ability to buff up the rest of the army, and then rally models back into that unit. Now, there's also a generic unique enhancement that you can get for this General's Handbook, which allows you to have a Galician champion, and once per battle can issue the rally command up to 3 times. The Gloomspite Gitz, as an example, can also issue this rally command up to 3 times, which is important. So what's changed? Previously, if I lost 10 models and they all had 2 wounds each, and I could rally them all on a 4+, if I rolled 10 4-ups, I could return 20 wounds. That's been changed. The maximum I can ever return now is 10 wounds. So 1 10-wound model, or 5 2-wound models. That's the maximum I can do with each rally command that I do. However, if I'm able to issue the rally command multiple times in a turn, I could do multiple stacks of 10, so up to 30. Gloomspite Gitz is a good example of this because they do rally on a 4+, and they have a heroic action which allows them to return up to do it 3 times. And because it's a heroic action, and even the rally command can be done in every person's turn, over the course of a battle round with Gloomspite Gitz, you could return up to 60 wounds. And with and you can, there's some other combos that you could do some stuff with there as well. So it's been a bit of a nerf to rally generally. No more can you return 2 Battescroll Blightlords in a unit, although that's not really that popular anymore. You can't return, I don't know, 10 out of 15 Blood Knights, for example. Or maybe Marathian the Bow Snakes, the ability to return a bunch of those Bow Snakes on a 4+. Although you can still return 5, which is a third of the unit, and you can do 5 in the next turn. So you can return 2/3 of the unit in one battle round, which is a significant points introduction. Ultimately, I think rally is one of those really cute little rules that they decided to put in. They thought it was quite fun. And many of us have become a little bit too addicted to something which really probably shouldn't be put in the game. It's one of those really powerful abilities that doesn't really make much sense in many, many ways. Why Kharadron Overlords, for example, who are sky pirates, rallying much better than a Nighthaunt model, which is a ghost, which is full of magic and gets off the ground. It's very weird. It's a very weird combination. So this is a change I am happy to see because I guess it does something. Although actually what it does do is it pushes for more elite units to be rallied because they're more effective, Thunder as an example, versus more horde units like a unit of Moonclan Stabbers. And it makes much more sense that you would rally a bunch of Moonclan Stabbers than I guess you would a unit of Skydwarfs. But here we are. It feels like an odd death mechanic or / healing mechanic that you would see in, let's say, Sylvaneth or in, I don't know, Soulblight Gravelords than you ever would find in some of the other books that have them, which I think is very, very weird. Anyway, it's good that it's changed. It's not a great change, in my opinion, and it's still very effective in the very efficient and highly elite units, which actually kind of makes it more of a problem. So as a balancing mechanic, it's got worse, not better, in my personal opinion. And the change I would have liked to have seen would have been it changed to a 6+. The change that it was trying to address was rally being too good, and I don't think it's done that. So that's what it was trying to do. This is what I think it's done, and I'd love to know what you think. Okay, so the next exciting change is to the universal artifact, the Arcane Tome, or Tome, depending on who you are. So this allowed you to take an artifact on a character, obviously not allied characters, important to point out, and what you could do is make them a wizard. Okay? That's important. You can never do this on unique units, so if you have Sigvald, you can't give it to Sigvald, but you can give it to a Lord of Pain. So now they've added some restrictions to it. Okay, you can no longer have a wizard take it, so you can no longer have a 1-cast wizard and you turn it into a 2-cast wizard. Okay, fine. You can no longer do it to a priest, and then you can no longer do it to anyone from the Khorne subfaction, or the Khorne faction, sorry. Okay, so the Khorne one's very easy. Khorne is meant to have magic, and therefore they've taken that away. Weirdly, they haven't addressed that in Kharadron Overlords, Fyreslayers, or Dispossessed, all of which are dwarfs, which I think are meant to not do magic because they follow the old ways. And if they do magic, that makes them, well, the best faction in the game, the Chaos Dwarfs. But, so they haven't addressed that, which is weird. So I'm not really sure what they're doing there. Is this a game thing, or is this like, because there's some heavy ludo-narrative dissonance, to quote my friend Pershaw in the chat. But the wizard one is so you can't have a 2-cast wizard, because I feel like they thought they pointed a unit, let's say a Warsong Revenant, who we saw a lot. They pointed it so that it had enough casts and enough spells at the points value it had, so they didn't want it to have another cast and make it more effective. Okay, that's what they were trying to achieve. With a priest, what they didn't want to do was double stack efficiency. They didn't want someone to be able to do a priest. The Lord Relictor was one of probably the most popular ones for this, right? So, the Lord Relictor was a priest and very efficient, and then also was a wizard and then was double efficient. Insane. That was absolutely crazy. So, they wanted to stop that double efficiency. That makes sense, and I understand. Okay, so but if you do have someone that's not those things, they can still become a wizard. But the next restriction they put in is that they're only able to do Arcane Bolt, which is a mortal wound spell, yeah, or Mystic Shield. No longer can you pick spells from the spell lore. No longer can you pick generic spells. So there's another way to kind of condense it down. Okay, and then they can cast 1 spell and they can unbind 1 spell. So effectively what they've tried to do is reduce the effectiveness of having or being able to choose a character that shouldn't have been a wizard into a wizard. The problem is they didn't really understand efficiency in line when they designed this. What I'm trying to talk about is when you have a very strong unit that has already a very strong existing ability. We're going to take a Battlesmith from Fyreslayers who has an ability to do a 4-up rally. If you make him a wizard, then he's also able to do Mystic Shield, which is +1 to save spells, and that is absolutely incredible. Because, +1 to save rolls, sorry. And that's absolutely incredible, and is the most efficient and effective spell in the game. Because it changes the maths on many units, especially when you can do it on hero character models. That's also very effective as well, like a Frostlord on Stonehorn, for instance, because then he goes from a 3-up save to a 2-up save, and then with all-out defense and also Finest Hour, you have what we call save stacking, which is very, very effective. So that's that's good that you can still do that in your army, but it's bad that Games Workshop didn't understand what was happening when we were talking about being efficient in line. So they've actually made that worse, not better, because you can no longer make units, wizards, more effective. For instance, many of the Tzeentch casters are a single cast wizard, so you can no longer make them cast 3 spells. You used to be able to have a Lord of Change and be able to make it cast 3 spells. You normally didn't, but you could, which makes sense because he's a Lord of Change. That's what he does, he casts a bunch of spells. No longer can you do that, and that feels very weird. And instead, you can just make a dwarf a wizard who also can do other cool stuff, which is strange. So it's a very strange change. It doesn't fit in narratively, and actually it makes wizards worse, and it makes units that weren't made to be wizards and now wizards even better. You're also able to cast endless spells, which is really, really effective, especially when combined with the command trait, the generic command trait, Master of Magic, which allows you to re-roll casts. So the generic command trait plus the artifact makes you still a more effective wizard and able to cast endless spells than some wizards that you pay points for. So this update has actually reduced the effectiveness of wizards in many, many ways, and hasn't helped. And all of Age of Sigmar 3, this has been true. This has been a problem for the whole time. So while they did try to address a problem, they've actually just made that problem worse. There we go. That's perfect. That's the perfect answer. We've nailed that. There you go. Hope that helps you out. So, the first change, and kind of like the major change to any of the factions outside of our generic changes, is to the Uruk War clans, but specifically the Kruleboyz. Kruleboyz not been doing great, but again, if we look at Honest Wargamer stats, not doing the worst, as you can see here. Kruleboyz sat at a 46% win rate, which is some of the best they've ever done. And this is because they've been able to get a variety of multiple stacked buffs over the past few months. They made it so the Swampcaller Shaman could cast spells and also be able to poison weapons so that they do more mortal wounds than, because previously they weren't able to do spells as well. Great little change. We love that. That's nice. They started to reduce the points on units even more in what I call the race to the bottom. This is where the War Scroll isn't very good, but because Games Workshop are tied to a paper production system, they rarely change rules because that means the books are less valid to sell you. And so instead of changing the rules, which would make units much better, what they do instead is they just reduce the points. So eventually you get units that should be super elite or hyper elite, and then they just get so cheap that then that becomes a whole different problem, which is kind of interesting, but we can talk about that another time. But there has been two changes to the Kruleboyz roster, and one of them is a nothing burger, but one of them is genuinely very exciting. And if you're a Kruleboyz player, this is legit. Like, this is super legit. And this is that you can do 2 dirty tricks instead of 1. Now, I've heard from some of my playtester buddies that if this doesn't work, the next update, it goes up to 3 dirty tricks. If that doesn't work, then it changes to 4 dirty tricks, and you can repeat the dirty tricks. Okay? And then if that doesn't work, you're just going to get it so you can do a dirty trick every round. And that's gonna be the process of trying to improve the army wholesale versus giving Gut Rippers a 4-up armor save. But this is a legit good change. This is legitly good. This is great. You're probably always going to make it so you're -1 to wound in the first battle round anyway. You then also got to change to one of the sub-factions so you can't be targeted outside of 12 inches, which is also really good, apart from all the units that can move inside 12 inches then shoot you, but we'll ignore that. And then, so that's good. So now you've got -1 to wound all the time, and then you can do the ability to move some units, like, and then maybe do an alpha strike, but you can't really do that, your army's not that fast. And then, or make it so units take d6 mortal wounds, or whichever your other favorite dirty trick is. This means you get to choose you're always going to be -1 to wound in the first battle round, great buff, plus actual dirty trick that you'll take. So a massive positive. And then the other changes they've done is to the Gut Rippers. Gut Rippers are one of the launch units for the Kruleboyz when they were released at the start of Age of Sigmar 3, and they are a wicked unit. Let's narratively remind ourselves of what the Kruleboyz are meant to be. They are sneaky jungle and swamp fighters. They snatch people like from the forests and the mists. They are the terror that you see in the forest and the mist in all of those kind of jungle movies. That's what they are, and they're a horrible, evil, nasty faction that use a lot of sneaking. They have scare shields, which is kind of like their symbolic shield, which a lot of YouTubers enjoyed painting when it got released. There's some great paint tutorials on them. They're pretty fun. And they changed it. So previously you had to roll 2d6 against a unit's bravery, and then if you were successful, you rolled like a dice, and then you eventually were -1 to hit. Very different to Lumineth Rumble, so just -1 to hit. Or like New Slanesh, which is -1 to hit. Or Moonclan Sabbers, which is just -1 to hit. Like so, but they couldn't have the orcs that lived inside the mist and jungle shanked you be just flat -1 to hit against everything. Instead, you're only -1 to hit against everything in melee versus not range stuff. So only melee, and then it doesn't apply against heroes and monsters. So any heroes and monsters are not scared of their shields and therefore not affected by them, which is weird. I would have loved to have seen what they're trying to do here is they're trying to improve the survivability of Kruleboyz. That's what they're trying to do, and instead giving them a 4-up armor save characteristic would have been absolutely the correct thing to do, in my opinion. So overall, for Kruleboyz, massive buff from from their being able to do 2 dirty tricks. Love that. Let's go, big thumbs. Kruleboyz change, sad, which is sad, but that's okay because yeah, that's great. That's fun. Okay, so we're going to talk about some little elements before we talk about the points from the core rules which have changed in your games of Age of Sigmar and are quite important. The first one is a straight flip of decision making from G-Dubs. Can an individual unit contest both an objective? Individual unit, by the way, does not mean a single model in a unit. It means a singular unit. So it can still have multiple models inside of it, but it's like a one unit. Can it contest both an objective and a terrain feature? And the answer is yes. The answer used to be, until yesterday, no. Completely changed. No real reason as to why. Some people in the chat seem to think that it's because it changes some grand strats and other things around. I would personally rewrite those grand strats because they're terrible anyway. But anyway, there we go. That's flipped. The other thing to remember, and know now is they've also changed how you gain control of terrain. So when you gain control of terrain, it's number of models within 3 inches of that piece of terrain. So it's like an objective, but you can now, you can control it with a unit and also an objective. That's crazy that that's changed. But also, it used to be that you could control an objective and then you could walk away from an objective. So you could like plant a little flag on it, but that's my objective. You used to be able to control a bit of terrain, plant a little flag on it, and be like, that's my terrain. I'm going to grab that and then just walk off. And then just have flags everywhere and be the king of all the terrain. Can't do that anymore. Right now, you can only control terrain if you are next to the terrain. That's it. So also an important, it's within 3 inches, not wholly within 3 inches. So that's the thing to remember. That's it. Super simple. That's terrain control. Those are the core updates, other than obviously the Arcane Tome and the rally changes. We also had some points up changes. Points up. Yep. We had some points up changes to different armies in the game, but not all of the armies, because as we know, if we don't touch on any of those armies, then those armies are perfectly balanced in every way, as is every unit inside their book. So the Lumineth Realm Lords have had a points update. There was some changes to tech lists, specifically when he can unbind an endless spell. It's now been changed to the start of the hero phase, so you can't do a series of casts and then unbind your own endless spell, specifically portals. Thank you to Mark in the chat for pointing that out. They did also clarify how the spell ignore and being able to ignore endless spells works for his aura of Selenar, which is good. It made it so that it's only enemy wizards. It may have omitted that previously, but I think it was always worded so that you were never able to do what we call the techless machine gun. Anyone that was doing it was doing that badly and wrong. And they've also changed one of the battle tactics as well. So it has to be 4 different wizards, which again I don't think was worded as specifically had to be 4 different wizards. But either way, whichever side of the argument you're on, it's now 4 wizards, which is great. So we love that. And they also did some clarity about techless and casting rolls, but that's just for people who don't get super into it all the time. Okay, so points changes. What do they do? What is the most common unit in Age of Sigmar 3? It is 20 Sentinels. It's actually 2 units of 20 Sentinels stood next to each other in tech lists. Incredibly common. We see them all the time. Probably the thing we see most of as well is Nurgle Knights. We see them a lot as well. Okay, so what have we seen as changes? We've seen tech lists go up 20 points. Now, even when tech list wasn't being taken in what we call the Lumineth Castle, 2 units of 20 Sentinels, some wind charges, and we covered this already on YouTube, and you can go watch that army masterclass. We also would see tech lists also being included in like Geometrica lists. So you'd see it with Stoneguard, and you would see it with Avlanor. So tech list is just an incredibly efficient piece. We also saw it with tech list combat build that we saw recently, where we saw just a ton of Wardens see play with no spell portal, so just charging in the big board, fighting everyone. So that's what we've seen already. And so what points changes did they make? Well, they put Sentinels up 10 points. Not as much as Bulgors, who went up 15 points. Bulgors have just come out in the Beast of Chaos book. They've had no time on the tabletop. However, Sentinels have had a lot of time on the tabletop. So what does this add to and Techless has gone up 20 points. So what has this added to? What has this added to the kind of classic Techless castle list? Well, it's added about, what did we work it out as being? I think it's added something like 60 points or 70 points to the list, because you would take tech list, who's 20, you would take 40 Sentinels, so 40, so that's your 60. You take a unit of wind charges, so then that would be 70. So this does mean that maybe you can't fit in an endless spell, maybe this means you can't fit in an extra unit. Yeah, so 70 points roughly. What is the major issue with Lumineth? Well, it's a great question. If you listen to some of the, like, I've done an interview with Matt Goldsborough. It's on Patreon if you want to go check it out. And he talked about the Techless Castle, does really well with it. And we talked about this a lot. And the main issue is the Helon subfaction. Helon allows you to get extra shots on your units if you get within 6 inches of the opponent. And so this means that you take a unit of, let's say, 20 Sentinels, which are able to normally do 20 shots, and now they can do 40 shots. They still do mortal wounds on 5s. They still do everything else. So the 10-point increase doesn't stop the fact that they actually shoot twice as well in one subfaction, which is significantly different as an uptick in efficiency versus being 10 points more expensive. So Helon would have been the correct way to address this and just change it so that it could only be wind chargers, which is kind of the battle line unit for that, because it's effectively kind of like a shooting speed subfaction. So that would have been the right change. I agree with Techless going up points, although he's so useful in that army that like it's kind of awkward that you're like, okay, if I don't have Techless, because he does incredible damage as well. Right? Incredible damage. Searing White Light is an AoE 18-inch mortal wound spell that affects every enemy unit on the board and potentially does d6 to mortal wounds to all of them. It's nutty. It's absolutely nutty. So Lumineth wasn't addressed in the rules way in which it needed to be addressed. And instead, they've added about 70 points onto its meta list, which is a significant hit. You will hear Lumineth players saying that, but I still think this is probably an A-tier army, probably one of the best armies currently in the game. There are some mitigating factors why you might see their win rate go down, and that's got everything to do with their brand new enemies. Beast of Chaos and Khorne. Khorne because of the spell Ignore, Beast of Chaos because of the ability to shoot and fight them off board, which means the Sentinels can't hurt them. So overall, not a good change to one of the top meta armies, but maybe the new books will solve that anyway, so that's quite interesting. Okay, so Beast of Chaos, which is a brand new book, has seen points changes, and it's also seen rules changes, which is pretty interesting. We're going to talk about the Doom Bull and the Bulgors first. There was a kind of, there's an Alpha Strike list, or a very strong deep striking list that you can do with Beast of Chaos, where you take a unit of 6 or 9 Bulgor, you make it so they deploy outside of 9 inches. Outside of 7 inches. They get +2 to charge, which means they're on a 5-up rerollable charge, and then they just hammer their opponent. Doom Bull also really strong as well. Those Bulgor, though, are glass cannons. They get hit back pretty hard and then they die. But they decided that this combo was strong enough that they were going to increase the points on Bulgor by 15 points, 5 points more than Sentinels, and the book's been out like a minute, like maybe 2. Which is pretty crazy. And the Doom Bull up points as well, which feels a tad unfair, is what I'm going to say. Bulgor now cost almost as much as 10 Chaos Knights, which you see it's 5 Chaos Knights, which you see all day, every day, which is pretty interesting. So that's the Bulgor change. Bit of a shame, in my personal opinion. I think the Bulgor were fine, so not a drama there. Now, they did change the Battescroll, and this is pretty interesting. Let's talk about the rules change they did for Battescroll before we talk about what they did with the points. So Battescroll used to have an ability where if their opponent that they're in combat with did all-out defense, they got +1 attack. Games Workshop thought that this was too strong, and so what they did was they changed it so that you get +1 to wound if someone uses all-out defense. Sorry, all-out defense, not all-out attack. If they use the all-out defense, you got +1. You got +1 attack on the Battescroll. Now you get +1 to wound on the Battescroll instead, which is pretty good because that extra attack was pretty strong because you got the ability to get a lot of rend on the Battescroll. So +1 to wound, though, is still a nice buff. It's just not as good a buff as it was previously. And for this, they reduced the cost of the Battescroll down by 20 points, which is pretty crazy because the combo I just talked about before, where you would drop a unit outside of 7 inches and give them +2 to charge, right, is the combo when you use it with Battescroll. You do not use it with Bulgor. You use it with Battescroll instead. And why do you do that? Well, previously it cost you 660 points for a max unit of 30 Battescroll, but now you have it for 600 points. They have 60 wounds on a 4-up armor save, and they rally on a 5-up. Now, of course, rally has been nerfed a little bit, so it's not quite as effective. You can only return 5 Battescroll each hero phase, but 10 over a battle round is a third of the unit ultimately. But so they've kind of side graded the Battescroll with the kind of weird change, but we've got that combo being even cheaper. Battescroll were kind of discussed as not being very good, and that's turned out to be absolute bollocks. They're an amazing unit, incredibly strong, very effective, great in combat. In my opinion, Battescroll have got better because they're cheaper. So there's that, okay? Great conversation about the side grade / slight nerf, but 60 points back on your list in a fairly cheap army. Like, it's not bad for the Battescroll, I promise you. I feel that that's pretty decent. The other change they made was the cockatrice, so you can't do multiple cockatrices. So if I fail the roll for the cockatrice, can I roll again for the same unit with a different cockatrice? The answer is no, you cannot. So only 1 4-up chance to make it so your opponent hit on 6s, but you're still affected by the ability, which is the change as well. The other change that they didn't put in is they didn't change how spawn work. Specifically, I can't remember what it's, the blah, 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 spawn. There's a name for it, but I forget what the name is, but it's some name. They haven't changed how the spawn work, which is a problem. I talked about this on the Stat Center a few weeks ago. You can stack the spawn, which is bad. And they didn't address this, which is Morgurite spawn. Thank you very much. Yeah, however you spell it, that's what it is. The Morgurite spawn, you take them in units of 3. As soon as you get them on the board, they individually deploy. Hasn't been changed. Obviously, don't buy Games Workshop spawn, obviously. But with that not being addressed in this Battescroll update and the Beast of Chaos FAQ being out, you're going to be able to build yourself some pretty great spawn lists, so that's great. Sticking with Chaos, we're just going to look at the points changes for Slaves to Darkness. The Ogroid Theridons went down 20 points, which is actually a pretty high percentage reduction for the Ogroids. They are what we call a glass cannon. They're not a brawler unit, but they can be very effective. Marker Corn, go in and smash face. 20 point cheaper is great for the Theridons. Eternus got cheaper, still trash. Demon Prince is 25 points cheaper. Legitimately might make in its list because of the artifacts and command traits that Demon Prince are able to take. Chaos Lord and Karkatrak went down 20 points, probably still trash. Chaos Warriors went down 10 points. This is like a nothing burger, as all 10-point changes are. And then Chaos Knights went down 10 points. While that's a nothing burger, again, these nothing burgers are making me hungry. Yeah, the 10-point reduction, importantly, does mean that one of the most popular Slaves to Darkness units, a unit of 10 Chaos Nurgle Knights with the Eroding Banner, I know it off by heart because I read it so much, has got 20 points cheaper, which is nuts. Chaos Chosen, I think Chaos Chosen are fine. They didn't really get any points changes either way. So this is kind of like a weird, like one of the most popular and most taken units in Slaves to Darkness is 10 points cheaper. So, like, that's odd. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say. I guess we can do... Yeah. That's it. The next one we're going to talk about is the Disciples of Tzeentch. They did have some points changes, specifically to all their characters. Curseling went up 20 points, the Fate Master went up 20 points, Fluxmaster, Magister, and the Magister on Disc of Tzeentch all went up 20 points. Why did they do this? Well, in Games Workshop stats, they think that the Disciples of Tzeentch is an army that's too strong. If Games Workshop was paying attention, they would see that the major problem with the Disciples of Tzeentch is that their battle tactics and grand strategies that they use for their book are very autocomplete and easy to do. However, the main problem with Disciples of Tzeentch, if there even is one, because in my opinion there isn't, is the Incarnate of Ghur. Tzeentch are one of the few armies that are able to kill their own caster. When you do take an Incarnate, you're able to bond it to a wizard, or bond it to a character, sorry. But then when you do so, if that character dies, then the Incarnate goes wild. This means it automatically gets +1 to hit. It also gets run and charge, and it has the ability to eat your own endless spells. So the major issue with Tzeentch is nothing to do with these random characters that they decide to add some points onto, and is everything to do with the Incarnate. Which again is not really recognizing where the problem lies. Maybe being able to stop that interaction would be very useful, but with a new Incarnate on the way, probably around the summer, which is that unreleased book, they maybe didn't want to mess around with those rules in a book that they were about to release, which I guess makes some sense. So Tzeentch points up on characters, which for this edition can't be targeted, which is kind of okay, but in the next edition you're going to feel that, and that win rate that Games Workshop have them at isn't even accurate anyway. So Are Disciples of Tzeentch one of the strongest armies in the game? Answer is no. And the points updates were like, I mean, a Magister went up 20 points compared to Sentinels. Make it make sense. Hexwraiths and Dreadscythe Harridans went up 10 points. There's nothing. This means nothing. Okay, time for the drama. Okay, Gloomspite Gitz book came out, and there was a lot of rhetoric online about Gloomspite Gitz being too strong, being insane, and destroying the game we know and love. A lot of other conversations about Gloomspite Gitz being allowed to be good at where they are because they trailed at the bottom of the meta for over 3 years. Well, about 3 years, because that's when the book was released. So they very comfortably held up the rest of the game by having the lowest win rate for a very, very long time. They got a new book, they got new rules, it was very strong. How strong was it? According to our stats, they had a 62% win rate with their very best build. Which is fine. Like, it's too strong. It's worth, so that's with Jaws of Mork, it's worth talking about. Glog's Mega Mob, straight down to 49%. So maybe needs some points rearrangement there, and that's what Games Workshop decided to do with these points changes. Scragrot, who is a more effective character, caster, and unit in the game than Lord of Change at 400 points, is now plus 50 points. 160 to 210 plus 50 points. Still incredibly efficient, wildly efficient at 210 points. You would definitely take him. Brings loads of abilities into the army. Isn't too taxing that it's a problem, but absolute bargain. Massive bargain. Absolutely brilliant. Gitz players will be high-fiving each other that it's only 210, so no problem there. Squig Bosch and Nash's Squig, in competitive lists you would normally see 2 of those, probably buffing up some of the other units around them. They went up from 100 to 120, so now if you're keeping track, we've added 90 points onto like more meta lists. The Gobblepalooza went up 15 points. You would normally see one of those. So now we're on 105 points on those lists. And then some Sneaky Snufflers, of which you would normally see maybe 2 lots of Sneaky Snufflers, have gone up 20 points. So you've added like 145 points onto meta lists, which is a lot of points, but it isn't the end of the world. And then finally the Squig Herd got 10 points added on, and you would obviously see multiples of Squig Herd. Sometimes you would see a fully buffed up unit of Squig Herd, maybe 2 multiple units. So again, if you're taking a fully buffed up unit, that's going to be another 30 points. Do it twice, that's another 60 points. So you're looking at nearly 200 points for some of those builds. They haven't addressed some of the other units, like they haven't done Boingrot Bounders, which are just insane. They haven't addressed Boingrot Bounders, and they haven't addressed Squig Hoppers. And Squig Hoppers was something you saw very, very effective as well. So yeah, on like maybe a very high-end meta list that wasn't using, because some people, like everything we just talked about gets added into a Gitz list, and then Squig Herd get added in. But when Squig Herd added in, sometimes it's actually Hoppers instead, and when it's Hoppers instead, it probably moves on to Boingrot Bounders, which makes them really strong. Do I think this is going to reduce the effectiveness of Jaws of Mork army? Yes, I absolutely do. Do I think it's going to be more effective than what they did to Lumineth? I also agree with that. I think it's going to be more effective. The big change probably for these guys, though, is the 4-up rally being changed more significantly. As I talked about, it's more efficient and more effective on elite units, and these guys are cheap, even though they are also very effective. So the rally being affected on those is a bigger deal than that, which I like. So how do I feel about the change? I feel like some elements of it were fair. But the rally change is a weird one for this army. But it's still very fast, it's still very mobile, it's still very aggressive, and that's just the Squig builds. The Spider build's fun, and the Trolls build is still very viable. So I definitely don't think it's gone from like an S, which I don't think it was anyway. I think it was an A to a B. I don't even know if it's done that. I think it's probably still around an A or a B as an army. So strong army, good army, with some probably fair nerfs. Okay, so that is the updates. There are a couple of nominal FAQs to some of the other factions, like Doors of Cain and Ogre Moor Tribes had kind of some updates, but like they were just about like their battle tactics and some other stuff. None of it was particularly impacting. What do we think about the change to the meta? I already said this on the stat show on Monday, but we are in a Wild West meta. We've just had I still feel like we're dealing with the Gitz and Beasts of Chaos book, still discovering combos and lists that work really well. We're also still processing what's happened with Khorne and Slaanesh. KO, as we currently make this video, are sat at a 63% win rate since their new book was released, which is pretty nutty. So they're very strong. Khorne and Slaanesh are looking very good as well. And I'm about to review the Soulblight Gravelords and OCR Bone Reapers book. 7 books in under 3 months means the meta is wild anyway. So maybe that's why we've seen Games Workshop do quite a light touch and not really addressing some things. Maybe the books that are out now are comparable to the books that have come out previously, and they don't need to talk about it. But for me, and I don't want to be a downer because, again, I'll be really clear about this. I love this game, and I think the game is in an incredibly healthy place. I don't feel like I have to show you the graph again, but if you go and look at the TSN stats, the win rates for the armies are very, very broad. Like, they're very good, and we don't have many armies suffering or too good. So it's a very good, healthy meta where lots of different armies are winning all the time, which is awesome. So a great game, doing really well. And that's fantastic. Loads of new books, loads of new builds, everything really exciting. The only negative, and you never meant to end on a negative, so I'll make this a shit sandwich positive negative, is that it really feels like some of the changes Games Workshop don't understand their own game system. Or, if they do, and they're trying to achieve something different to what we see as a game, I'd really like them to put out why they changed some of those elements. Like, not changing how Helon works, but adding 10 points to Sentinels doesn't really do what they think it needs to do. So I really hope that they watch this video and they try to understand their own game a little bit better, talk to the community more, interact a little bit more would be really positive. Because right now, I would argue that no one's really going to... The update is kind of a bit of a nothing, but they've said, like, oh, we know Arcane Tome's there and Rally, so we can have a discussion about it, but not really the right one, which is a bit of a shame. But a year away from edition, minimal viable product produced by Games Workshop doesn't really mean they're ever going to do that. Positives, though, loads of cool new books, loads of cool new units, Cities of Sigmar on the way, new Seraphon on the way, so the game's in a really incredible place. So if you're thinking about getting into the game or getting back into the game, then I would say transparency is cringe. I agree with the chat. So I would probably never ever want to be transparent about it. So that's fair. Yeah, like if you do want to get into the game, I couldn't encourage you more. Events are really cool. There are so many new armies being played. Loads of people in the Sigmar community want you to come out and play games with them. So that's the positive message to take away. Because while this hasn't addressed issues that someone like me has been looking at a lot of the time, most of you probably don't spend most of your day all day thinking, talking, writing, and creating content about it. So it's probably not that important. That's not meant to, like, anyway, there we go. Hope you've enjoyed it. Comments and likes and all those other things. Thanks to everyone on Twitch. Thanks to everyone on Patreon. Support the show. Love the show. Hope you're great. Have a great life. Carry on.